Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this very special and first show of Cricket Panchayat of Women's Cricket Zone. We have with us two ladies from Sussex, former players, as well as they are sitting in a big chair as an administrator too. So, Claire and Holly, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, and thanks for having us.
So here we go. My first question would be to both of you. How does one keep women's cricket in conversation, keep it visible, relevant when so much financial strain is being felt around the world? Claire?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good and important question, obviously. I think from my perspective at the ECB, so my role is Managing Director of Women's Cricket at the England and Wales Cricket Board, and I think we entered the pandemic in a really fortunate position because back at the end of 2019, we just launched our strategy over the next 5 years to transform the women's and girls game, which saw a lot of additional investment. So we announced a £20 million investment for 2020 and 2021, with a view to that being 50 million over the 5-year period of the strategy. And the fact that we'd launched that, I think, as part of the overall ECB strategy called Inspiring Generations, ours was the first part of that to really launch and be publicly shared and to really get underway. And I think that in itself showed a huge commitment from the ECB towards the growing the game for women and girls at all levels. So whether that's at the elite end or women's and girls club cricket at the grassroots end, there's a huge commitment to do that. And when the pandemic happened and it became very clear that we were going to lose a significant amount of this summer, if not all of it. The ECB board were very open about that commitment to the women's and girls game continuing. And hopefully that's what we see across all of women's sport. We see real commitment to continuing the momentum that's been building over recent years. Women's sport has had kind of years of underinvestment and underdevelopment, and there's a real lack of, we really need to keep our foot on the pedal in that regard. And that's obviously easier said than done when you mention the financial strain, because, for a lot of women's sports and particularly women's team sports, it can be a cost center. Because it's like a sort of startup business where you're really trying to invest for future growth and sustainability. So, I think we're in a really good position. We, as an organisation, we will end up being, we knew that we would lose somewhere between 100 and 400 million pounds as an organisation and as a game in this country because of COVID. Fortunately, it's looking like being nearer the lower end of that spectrum, largely because of international men's cricket being up and running now against the West Indies. And so hopefully the investment will, it will be able to be protected. And, we're working hard on staging international women's cricket in September. And we're working hard on the return of women's domestic cricket in late August. So we have lost some time, but hopefully, we will sort of save some of the summer from a women's game point of view. But it's difficult. I'm sure, Holly will say in a minute, you're in it's a constantly changing conversation and changing world as to what is going to be able to happen and what isn't, and what are the priorities. And I think I'm just thankful that, we have got a strong desire from the top of the organisation here to really drive the change in the women's game.
Oh, that is great. Holly, same question to you. How at ICC you're handling this situation?
Yeah, I think it's really important to keep women's cricket a part of the conversation. We obviously there's a lot of contingency planning going on at the moment. I think the main thing that we've been doing in order to handle COVID as a whole is being in constant communication with our medical advisory committee, giving guidelines of return to cricket to all of our members in line with their own local governments, obviously updating playing regulations so people can get back to playing and being on the pitch as much as possible. And we've taken this opportunity with people working from home, people doing webinars like this, to launch our 100% Cricket Leading the Game webinar series, to get people talking about the game, as you said, keeping women's cricket front and centre of conversation. And I think, to echo Claire's point earlier, something that Belinda Clark brought up in one of our webinars was around how important it is to the investment that we've already made over the last 5-10 years to get women's cricket to this point, to get 86,000 fans into a packed MCG. And actually that it would be such a shame and a waste of this investment if we don't protect it, and if we don't keep women's cricket as a must-have and not as a nice-to-have. It has to be a must-have and has to stay in conversation and stay in our investments. And I think testament to all of our members in this challenging time, and that the women's cricket hasn't dropped off conversations, hasn't dropped off people's primary agendas. Yes, in the short term, as Claire mentioned, men's cricket might need to sustain the whole of the game for the short term, but certainly long-term conversations that I've been having, people see women's cricket as certainly a priority, and that's what's been most pleasing to see.
Interesting. Claire, we read news as well as discussions that that the rounds were going out, that the introduction of domestic retainers. You had mentioned that men's cricket had to be prioritized, but women would give importance as well. How you are going to do this balancing act?
Well, I mean, if COVID hadn't happened, then this would have been, probably the biggest summer or the biggest year ever in this country for women's cricket. In not in terms, for example, of the World Cup in 2017, but in terms of the investment and the plans that we were starting to roll out this year. And one element of that was was a new elite domestic game that would sit within the ECB at the same level as men's county cricket. So we were launching a new elite women's competition with 8 regional teams rather than 18 county teams. And within each of those regional setups, we were introducing full-time contracts for around about 40 in total, 40 female players. Now, the full awarding of those contracts hasn't been possible because of COVID and because of having to kind of freeze budgets across the game to work out, whilst we worked out what our losses were going to look like and what the summer would look like. But as you mentioned, we have awarded some regional retainer contracts to 25 players, which just gives those players some security over the summer, and which I think shows that we are still keeping up the momentum around the women's domestic game. When that gets up and running at the end of the summer and then moving into the winter, we will then award those 40 full-time contracts. And that will be the start, if you like, of a professional era for women's domestic cricket, which obviously the men's game has enjoyed for a long time already. In the men's game, we've seen most of the men's players on the furlough scheme, so on the government retention scheme throughout the summer. So their salaries have been massively, the paying of those men's player salaries have had government support. So, but for us, as we were embarking on having professional female players, that obviously wasn't an option. I think the other thing to say is that this summer was due to see the launch of the 100, the new 100 ball competition for 8 men's and women's teams, joint teams, joint branding, joint team names. And that was obviously going to be a really high profile competition for the men's, but particularly the women's game. And that would have seen players earning a decent amount of money to play in that competition. That's obviously been postponed until next year. So I think, you know, it's working out, you know, yes, quite a few of our female players have lost out this year in what was supposed to be a lucrative first year of kind of professional domestic cricket for them. But you know, the good news is that will start up in full from a domestic game point of view over the winter, and then in terms of the 100 next summer. So, you know, balancing, I think your question was, you know, how do you balance the priorities? And I think, you know, I don't think there's, I don't feel that the women's game is particularly at risk. I think so as an example, we've set up a working group that has met for the last month or 5 weeks to look completely equally at the restart of men's county cricket and then the start-up of women's regional cricket. So on that group, we've had representatives from the counties, from the women's teams, from the medical team, from our venues and facilities team, looking at adhering to the government guidelines about getting cricket back on again, men's and women's cricket, sharing the facilities. So I felt very reassured by the attitudes across the game, actually, around getting men's and women's cricket back up and running.
Only all of us know that sports is facing a huge challenge. As far as cricket is concerned, the established boards and countries will hopefully find out a way to combat this crisis. But what about the upcoming countries, the younger teams? What ICC is planning for them to help them out to combat this crisis?
What's actually been amazing to see was a country like Vanuatu, who was the first country back playing cricket, and obviously was broadcasting or live streaming their domestic cricket to the world, and they had amazing coverage on that series. And it's great that a country like that can kind of showcase our sport coming back from cricket. And I know that there's a lot of countries looking to play T20 internationals again. Obviously, when we opened up T20 international status to women's teams first, leading the way again, and then to men's teams 6 months later in 2019. So I think we're certainly looking to support these countries with giving them guidance and obviously allowing them to play cricket as safely as possible.
The only blessings in disguise during this pandemic was we had time to reflect on the game, women's cricket game. What kind of realizations have emerged from this reflection, and what innovations both of you really think that women's cricket should get into?
Yeah, look, I think I'm not too sure about innovation. I mean, you know, we're clearly going to be working in a very different way, aren't we, all of us, in our own organisations and around the world. And one thing I've certainly enjoyed is conversations like this, and lots of discussions across women's sport. I was on one the other day with basketball in America, tennis, golf, football, rugby, netball, and I think a lot of collaboration and sharing of good practice and ideas. I think what we've also seen over here is a really strong, you know, in terms of the reflection, I think a really strong desire from our government to put pressure on sports here to demonstrate what sports are doing to look after women's sport. So I think there's been a really strong acknowledgement here, and that, you know, turning that into reality isn't always as straightforward. But I think what's been heartening and good to be part of is seeing a real kind of collective desire to protect women's sport, and, you know, to acknowledge that there has been a lot of inequality until now, and that there still is. And I think I can only speak for this country, and you guys will have your own reflections, but there's been a lot of talk over here about equality and inequality and what the pandemic has shown in society, whether that's across gender or background or race. And I think, and I hope that there will be a real desire to, whether it's cricket or other sectors, to really try to put that equality lens on things even more sharply. I said earlier that, women's sport has, suffered for many years because of, because the default position has been around investing in men's sport, and that being what needs the exposure and has had all the profile. And now we've got a chance, I think, with people having a slightly different view of the world. We've got a chance, I think, if we all work really hard together to address that. If we had 6 to 12 months of no women's sport, no visibility, I think that would set us back years. Because women's sport was just taking big strides. I actually feel, from our leadership team position at the England and Wales Cricket Board, that there is an even stronger desire to back the women's game than there was before, which is really, obviously, from a personal and professional perspective, really, really heartening.
Holly, your thoughts on this? What are your reflections?
Yeah, I think it's been a really good time to have conversations. So I have catch-ups with my equivalents at World Rugby and FIFA. It used to be kind of ad hoc, but now we catch up on a weekly basis, and it's fantastic to hear how other sports are approaching this, the challenges they're facing, and we have a very really fruitful relationship and dialogue going, which I find great. I think the other thing that I've really learned around this, again, going back to our kind of 100% cricket webinar series, and you mentioned innovation, we had an 100% innovation webinar with Sophie Devine and Jemima Rodriguez, and we started talking about how women's cricket could lead the way, and what innovations could we embrace to kind of lead the way for cricket. And there were things spoken about like smaller balls and shorter pitches, and we kind of opened up the flow of conversation. And by no means was this a ICC position that this is what we're looking to do. We just weren't afraid to start the conversation and be open to new ideas. And what I found was how fantastic it was, what kind of engagement we got from those conversations. And we had, players like Shika Pandey on social media going, feeling that she was empowered to have a voice on the conversation. I think for me, it's around us not being afraid to talk about these topics, be open about it, and really empower people to have a voice on innovations and be open to having those discussions. And it was one of the key learnings I found for me, is that we should be kind of opening up that dialogue more often and provoking those conversations and topics.
This question is for both of you. All of us know that to take this game forward, we have to keep an eye on the grassroots level. But now so much of time and finances lost. How we are going to meet these two ends? How we are going to keep an eye on the grassroots level? Because big series and big matches will happen. But ultimately, we have to keep an eye on the grassroots level cricket. How we are going to help this cause?
Well, look, I don't think that's a new challenge, actually. I think, yes, it's maybe a sharper challenge with less money. But in the women's game, particularly since I've been involved in administration of the women's game, it's a constant challenge. Where do you invest your money? It's a chicken and egg. Do you invest at the elite end to show, to give some visibility to elite women's cricket, to show a possible career path? Well, that's no good if you've got no one playing the game at a grassroots level. So it is about, allocating your resources accordingly and recognizing that, one is lost without the other. So there's no point having 1 million girls playing the game in schools and clubs if there's nowhere for them to progress. Equally, there's no point having a very well-paid England women's team if there's nobody to fill their shoes in 5 or 10 years' time. So I think it's a perennial challenge, is how do you allocate your resources? And, it is the grassroots of the game that is the lifeblood of the game. It's where your volunteers come from and are needed, and it's where boys and girls pick up bats and balls for the first time. So, I think it's about getting your strategy right in terms of your investment. And obviously that will become a harder exercise with less money. But to be honest, the women's game has always had less money than the men's game. So, it's certainly not a new challenge. And it will be a challenge across men's and women's cricket, obviously, across the world, I'm sure, is, how do we invest less money for a little while to make sure that we're still seeing brilliant elite performances and international performances and global events and IPL and so on. But how do we also protect the grassroots of the game? So yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. And I think it's, part of the challenge is recognizing the importance of the connection of that whole pathway. It's those elite players that inspire boys and girls to play if they can see them, whether that's live or on television or streaming or whatever. So, that's the constant challenge, I think, of being a cricket administrator, actually. So it's not a new one, but maybe it's a slightly more difficult one with less money to go around.
Holly, what ICC is doing on this front?
On grassroots cricket, we certainly have an importance with our the associate members in terms of our grants and the importance of women's cricket in that. I think the real main lever that we have been able to sort of push and in order to create a groundswell of activity and like Claire said, set up pathways is the introduction of an under-19 World Cup, something that has been missing from our international events calendar, for a long time now, and it's fantastic that we will be getting that event every 2 years in the future, and I think that's a really important asset I think that we can bring and create that pathway for talented girls to play it on an international stage and don't get lost to other sports or get lost to not playing sport at all, and actually keeping them in the game and then transitioning them into cricket. I think Claire mentioned the kind of balance between grassroots and high performance investment, and I think you can go about it two ways. There's a really fascinating case study with the likes of Thailand, who have very much gone up the ranks quite quickly in women's international cricket and have made a very targeted approach to their kind of focus on their women's national team and emerging national players and create a really good quality hardball cricket program. And now they're starting to look into their grassroots, and it's been a fascinating kind of case study to watch. But I agree, it's you've got to have it both ways, and I think the ICC, the biggest thing is creating that lever to create that momentum from our members.
I can tell you one interesting thing is not only the COVID numbers in India are growing, but ladies cricketers, the young girls picking up a bat and wish to play cricket, those numbers are also growing. So that is a heartening fact. Claire, all of us are so happy that you're going to mark your new guard in coming days. So all the best, good luck. How are you feeling? Oh, we are so excited. What are your thoughts?
So I've got some time to recover from the shock, which I still feel actually, even though I've known about it since February. I do still feel quite in shock. So I've got some time to get over that, and also I've got plenty of time to plan, I think, really well. The role of being MCC president is obviously an enormous honour, and I guess it carries a little bit of extra pressure being the first woman to be asked to do it. But I've got some good people around me who I have done the role themselves, who I'm friends with. So whether that's Mike Gatting or Matthew Fleming or John Barclay, there's some good trusted friends there that I can talk to about the role. You know, it's an amazing opportunity, and I think it will dovetail with my ECB role really nicely. The challenge will be probably my work-life balance, I should think, in terms of, I don't think there haven't been many MCC presidents who've also had full-time jobs or very demanding full-time jobs. So I'm going to have to get my diary in order. So I've got plenty of time to do that. But look, it's a huge honour, and I'm very determined to make the most of that year. I don't start until October next year, because Kumar Sangakkara has been extended because of coronavirus. So I'm determined to make the most of it and to really try to, you know, there won't be any surprises that my focus will be around inclusion and diversity and, you know, trying to help the club become more modern. You know, it's one of the oldest sports clubs in the world, if not the oldest. And with its long waiting list, change happens quite slowly at the MCC. So trying to work out how we can speed up a bit of that change. But, you know, I think there's a real sense from the MCC of wanting to do that. And, you know, for cricket to be welcoming to everybody. You know, Kumar was the first overseas president. And then for the first female president to follow that, it shows, I think, a strong intention from the MCC. And yeah, thank you for mentioning it. I'm absolutely honoured, and I'm very, very proud and humbled to have been asked to do it.
Claire, as a cricketer, we all know how you know very well how to build a long innings. So all the best to you. And can't thank you enough, Holly and Claire, for talking to us. And we will keep in touch. We'll try our best at Women's Cricket Zone to take this game forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.